So, welcome everyone. Today we are joined by the David Alexander Good and FLuX, also known as John Malloy, the creative minds behind Good from the Amazon jungle to Suburbia and back. David is a scientist, author, and founder of the Yanomami Foundation, whose powerful life story bridges indigenous, Amazonian, and Western worlds. FLuX is an award winning artist and creator of the Trump Nouveau style, known for his bold genre defying visual artwork. Together, they've crafted a graphic memoir that has richness and emotion, and it is visually stunning. So, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
My name is Manji. I am doing this interview on behalf of NBM Graphic Novels, and I myself am also an author. So I want to start off with a few icebreaker questions to kind of get the ball rolling. So this question is for the both of you. What's something that people might not know about you, even if they've read or seen your work?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very
Interesting.
interesting and entertaining question. Yeah. Well, I work in a laboratory in Canada, so I work on studying the gut microbiome. So I handle a lot of fecal samples. So maybe not a lot of people realize that a big part of my career is dealing with poop and other people's poop. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in this interview.
Wow. Okay, FLuX. My apologies.
No, I actually, if I didn't become an artist and I followed in my family's footsteps, I would be working in a cemetery right now. So basically, all my brothers and my father work in cemeteries as like caretakers and cremators and all kinds of crazy stuff. So, yeah.
Wow. Some really mind blowing facts. So, second part of the icebreaker, how did the two of you first connect and what made you want to work together on this project?
I mean, I can start just because I feel like I kind of got the ball rolling. I mean, at least, so I read David's father's book, and I have it here just for the interview. Into the Heart. It's probably looking backwards on here. I'm not sure, but it was amazing, and it sort of opened me up to the Yanomami. And this was a long time ago. I read it, and I just was so drawn to them as a culture and a people for so many reasons, and that there was so much we could learn from them, and the fact that they were just almost like stuck in time, like they've never changed, and we always do, as in our part of the world, it's like always about progress, and then at the end of the day, it's like, are we really making progress? I mean, there's stuff that we can learn from them. They've been doing the same thing for so long, so I wanted to do something about them or with them, and I had kind of dabbled in some storytelling before about it, but one of the biggest hurdles, and I agree with this, was that coming from somebody like me, anything that has to do with the Yanomami comes off as appropriation. So it was something where like, okay, I can't really do anything about this. And then I had an agent I was communicating with. She told me about David's book, and I didn't know about his book. And I checked out his book and was totally fascinated by that story. And so I reached out to him just coldly and said, "Hey, do you want to do a graphic novel?" And that's how it started.
Wow. Talk about asking for what you want and going for it. So this question specifically is for David. What made you feel like Good needed to be told as a graphic novel rather than just in words?
Yeah, I was really introduced to the graphic novel world through FLuX, and came to really appreciate, the graphic novel as a medium of storytelling, and how it is a sort of a fusion of art and images with text and stories. And what I really like about when I was initially talking to him about more collaborating on this project is, the ability to kind of like pause time and really kind of immerse yourself in the narrative through imagery. So if something about this story really resonated with you, you could, look at the imagery, you can, connect with the character, and reflect on, maybe some of your own, experiences that could have resonated with this sort of fusion of text and imagery. And I've come to really enjoy and appreciate this form of storytelling.
Nice. So FLuX already answered the next question, so we're just going to go ahead and go into our official first segment. So we're going to talk about the story behind Good. And this question, again, is for you, David. The title Good obviously carries personal meaning. What does it represent for you beyond just your name?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, the Good was my nickname. And I suppose, this title, growing up, my when I was a kid and adolescent, it's kind of like my nickname. I was named Good, but then, the name, the family name, is sort of kind of, to me, became a symbolism of how these very unique, different, backstories of my mom and my father, and she adopted the last name, so she was Yarma Good, and my dad Kenneth Good, and so. And then, I think for me, that's what, this title is a reflection of, sort of my identity, but not through just simply as a family name, but how that sort of reflected my kind of emotional development growing up. However, what I do love about Good, and also the story, is that it's such a universal descriptor. And I feel like the universality of the story, where they could resonate with families all around the world. It's a title that I feel that also has a sort of a universality to it, where it could resonate with many languages all across the world as well. So I think it's something that is not, like esoteric in a way, where like, good can be translated in so many different ways in so many different languages. So I really like that aspect of it.
Wow, I really appreciate the conversation around family. And for our viewers watching, today is International Families Day. So I think this interview was spot on and great timing. So again, with you, David, so you mentioned about identity and family, but there's also, and also memory. Were there any parts of your life that felt hardest to put on the page?
Yeah, as a 5-year-old, losing my mother, and trying to put that through imagery and text, was difficult, because time heals, but you always remember, and you always sort of mourn for that child, in a way where, like, you feel for the anguish and the pain and then the loss that child was feeling. But then, the challenges of spending 20 years of not having, a mom that I've grown so attached to as a young child. And fortunately, there is a happy ending to that story, but I would say that is always not so much hard to put on the page, but it always sort of pulls on my emotions every time I relive, those moments, by reading Good. Yeah.
Nice. So the next segment is for either one of you, and we're just going to touch back on the idea of memories and difficult parts of navigating through those memories. So were there any parts of the story that were difficult to revisit or translate into images? FLuX, this might be a question for you, but either one of you can chime in.
Well, I think one thing that is tricky is that it's his story, and I was building upon it. I basically took his original story about what happened to him and then created this story, which, the parts of Yarima growing up were fictionalized based on what somebody like her would have gone through growing up. But I wanted to overlap those stories. And so it was very, there was part of me that was really creative and wanted to just jump right in, but also part of me that was just a little hesitant, because, this is touchy stuff. Especially, I didn't have the best childhood. And honestly, I would have been much better off without my mother. So it's kind of funny, the irony of the whole thing. And even me, I'm writing a graphic memoir online on Webtoons called Queasy, and that one, it's definitely poking holes in things that I just have kind of chosen not to think about. And so I tried to be as sensitive as possible working with David on this, because I know how these things can be. But I think, I mean, just from my observation, I can't speak for you, David, but I feel like you've owned these things, and you have gone past them, and you've overcome them. And I mean, in the story, he comes full circle when he sees her, I feel like, and that's where everything sort of wraps up. And I think back to the other question about good. I think one of the things that I tried to sort of explore was that, on the surface, if you see like a kid whose mom left him at 5, you think that's horrible, right? That's not good. That's bad. But you understand the whole idea of the book is to really get people to understand what she went through. And that really, I mean, so many things that we consider good or bad in the Western world, in other countries are not the same. So at any rate, sorry, I went on a little too long there, but that's kind of my part of it.
Really cool.
Wow. I'm just realizing that the three of us have so much in common.
That's funny.
So much in common. Just a touch back for those viewing. So my book, Mom, also touches on the idea of an origin story. And we have a lot in common, David and FLuX, as far as that disconnect from the childhood and adolescence years with our parents. And how that shapes us. I'm not going to get into my story. We can talk about that offline.
Yeah.
So to our next question, as I read, I noticed a lot of powerful themes. 3 of the most that stood out to me was rewriting one's origin story, escapism, abandonment, and also on a symbolic level, the reoccurring use of mirrors. Now, were those intentional themes from the start, or did they just naturally emerge as the story took shape? Again, it could be either one of you to answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, FLuX, if you want to field that one, I think,
Well, I mean, we could both kind of answer that. I mean, I feel like, so David's book, The Way Around, that I had read about his story, just at one point briefly in the text, he mentioned something about this superhero feeling of otherness, and then utilizing that like to be a strength. And then I think it did give him strength that, the fact that he survived, alcoholism and that car accident and all those things that happened, it's amazing. But I think that's part of it, because he was, and I kind of feel this way as an artist too. Sometimes I'm like, sometimes I try really hard just not to like be normal, because I think being normal is boring, and like it gives you so many limitations. So like, because I had a weird childhood, it actually gives me a leg up on being different. And I feel like I kind of try to channel that into the book too, and channeled it from David's story. So I think that's part of the superhero thing. The mirror thing, that wasn't intentional, but there was the scene where it goes from David in the mirror, I think, to her in the reflection in the water. So that with Yarima, growing up, I had to use reflections to show her, because really the whole thing is from her point of view. So you couldn't see her face until she was either looking in water, or there's one scene where she's looking at like the lens of a camera. So yeah, that was 2 of them. I don't remember what the other one was. I'm sorry. The other question.
So the other question was more so about the use of mirrors, rearranging. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted a little bit with the text message. Rewriting one's origin story, and like if those all together came naturally or gradually. I think that's what the question.
Yeah, I mean, David, I'm sure it was that kind of your intention too with your story originally, with the superhero sort of otherness, or did I just totally like pull that out?
No, we had that was based on a discussion that we've had,
Okay.
where as a kid, every superhero that I remember had some came about by some sort of dark past, or like Superman losing his parents and well his entire world. Batman lost his mom and dad, and so and I guess I remember being so young, like 6 or 7 years old, thinking like that maybe I share a similar trajectory or a path, and had these imaginations, wild imaginations, that I would you know be a superhero, because of in a very kind of dark way. But a lot of these these characters have that have this role of being a hero or whatever. And I guess maybe it was a mechanism for me as a child to cope in losing my mom and trying to make myself feel better.
Nice. So I actually have some very interesting points that stuck out to me when reading the book that led me to think, okay, there's a theme going on. There are some things here that I'm not sure if they're intentional, but I remember more specifically the importance of baseball and you reclaiming your identity or creating this new identity. How was that, David? How would you say including baseball in your storytelling helped really bring out the idea of, I'm reclaiming my story? Because I noticed that it was almost like one of the things that just brought the best out of you.
Yeah, well, I tell people baseball in a way, helped me, survive through life as a, as a young child, adolescent, and early 20s. When I played baseball, and first of all, I was an outfielder, so I was sort of like master of my domain, and I could just be out there by myself and really just focus on just one task at hand, and it's just catching the ball and throwing it in. But what I thinking back on it, baseball was an identity. Kind of I developed an identity around baseball because I loved the game so much, and loving the game and being good at it. It had nothing to do with my Yanomami identity, and had nothing to do with any identity. It's like I caught the ball because I was fast. It had nothing to do with who my mother was or who my dad was. It had nothing to do with the Amazon rainforest in New Jersey. It just, all I had to do was just sort of, my soul kind of will to catch this ball. And to me was sort of a momentary escape into being in a world where I wasn't, judged by the color of my skin. I wasn't judged by my history. I wasn't sort of, all I was judged by was whether I could hit the ball well or if I could catch the ball well. And to me, that was a big part of creating this sort of space of serenity and peace. And it just became just a part of my identity and a way of being able to escape like this, world full of anxiety and anguish and mourning, for losing mom. So yeah, baseball was sort of, my pastime for sure.
Nice. And also, as you were talking about baseball just now, the idea of just you being able to be who you were and not what was placed upon you, it almost reminded me of the time in the story when and this is related to mirrors too, and how you had two very important women in addition to your mother and your life that saw you at the time in a way that you couldn't see yourself when you looked in the mirror. So again, it's just such a beautiful way of storytelling. You guys did an amazing job. So as I'm reading
Thank you.
the page, and I'm like, look how beautiful that is, that you're able to find yourself in not just baseball, but it's like the other women in your life forced you to see you because they saw David. They didn't see all the external things. was that something that you and FLuX decided that, hey, this needs to be part of the storytelling, or was it just a matter of, well, I did eventually having relationships with women? Was that to show the parallel between how not having your mother earlier on affected your relationships with women? What was the thought process?
Well, I the sort of kind of emotional turmoil and the inability to cope from the trauma of losing my mom, carries on into your, 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old. And so when you live with this trauma, that kind of gets expressed and through how you develop relationships, and with your friends, with loved ones, and with partners. And so it was challenging, obviously, to kind of cope with that loss as an adult. But then I found some really good friends, some really good people that really helped reaffirm that what I was going through, wasn't it isn't a symptom of something that's wrong with me. It's a symptom of something that's natural and right. If you lose your mom, you're going to cry and mourn. And I grew up thinking that, crying and just and showing vulnerability was just something that, that should not exist, especially, with sort of the levels of, male toxicity that I was exposed to growing up in my, in society and whatnot. But then having, these sort of very important people in my life really helped me understand that, approaching trauma and acknowledging trauma and going through it is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of healing, and so it's like I've been living with a wound that has never really allowed itself to scab over and heal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you grew up, you didn't have someone, I'd say you didn't have a female counterpart in your life, a parent, to tell you that it was okay to do those things, right? And I think, I know your father's kind of old school, and my father was too, to an extent. So there wasn't, growing up in that time period, you weren't tough if you had, issues. So I think, yeah, it's interesting. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So we're gonna pivot a little bit away, and we're going to talk more about the visuals. And this question is specific to FLuX. So your art style in Good is very raw. Sometimes it feels like I'm almost in a dream, and it doesn't follow traditional comic panel structure. So what led you to that approach?
Well, I've never really tried to do traditional comics. Like I didn't grow up with comics. And I read like Vertigo comics and stuff back in the 90s, late 90s. And then, I really got introduced to like European comics, when I was, a young adult. So those are the things like, that really got me excited, like stuff like Moebius, um, Munoz and Sampaio, different artists like who tried different things. Even like American artists like Dave Mazzucchelli, and then also Winsor McCay. So Winsor McCay, he did comic strips back in the early 1900s, for newspapers and things. He did little Nemo and Slumberland. Um, his aesthetic of storytelling was definitely, he just constantly tried new things. So for me, it just, the way that I approached this was David and I actually did a jam board, and we did like Post-its, to kind of figure out how the story was laid out. And then from there, I took each individual, and we were broken up into chapters, and then I drew them really small, like really small thumbnails of each page, just to kind of get a sense of where things went, and just let the story kind of dictate how the panel structure was. And I'm doing that now with the new book that I'm working on. It's a little different. It's more of a sci-fi story. But just kind of using the mood and the what we're trying to tell to figure out the structure as opposed to just a general comics layout. And honestly, like because I didn't grow up with comics, I always thought comics, like mainstream comics, were a little bit boring and just, I don't know, like not that very exciting. Then I saw European comics, I'm like, oh my god. And like Chris Ware, like I love Chris Ware. He's not European, obviously, he's from Chicago. And but so that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited. And then I just kind of grabbed from all these places, like not on purpose, but I like Charles Burns, I like Chris Ware, I like Dave Mazzucchelli, and all these people, and like kind of absorb that stuff, and that's what came out. So.
Yeah, it was really interesting, like watching how, as I'm going through the book, I'm seeing, okay, we go from something that looks traditional and that could be traditional, but I know it's not. And then we have these sections. In my book, it was a poetry book, so I had interludes in between poems. So for me, every time we switched from David in present day to the Yanomami rainforest, it was kind of like oh wow, like it really captured the beauty of what I imagined the Amazon would be, the bright colors, the attention to detail as far as portraying what the Yanomami people actually look like. I really appreciated watching that as I was reading in between the books. I was like, okay, this is really cool. I felt like almost, yes, I used the term dreamlike, but now that I think about it, it almost felt like I was watching a movie.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot from people. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm thinking, I'm over here sitting down. I'm like, okay, what background music would go best with this scene?
That's awesome.
Reading this book, I'm like, okay, this right here is really spot on. Like the attention to detail again, even if you guys didn't initially, just spot on, and how it was received. So we're gonna move on to the next part of it, and this was kind of like a segue into these set of questions. So this one is for David. Some of the dialogue in Good feels like it comes off from memory or emotion, not just fact. How did you balance the truth with storytelling?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I wouldn't exactly say, I would say the truth of storytelling is all there, but it's how do we take the sort of illustrative and narrative license to be able to create a sort of a meaningful and coherent flow. So it was a challenge, right? So a lot of these events take place, it starts from my backstory with my mom and my dad, and then losing my mom, and then growing up, and then reuniting with her. That's a lot of story to tell, within a few pages of a graphic novel. So, we've decided, John and I, when we work together, we kind of, as we discussed the story, sort of assessed what were the best, or what were the most impactful emotions that we think would resonate with the audiences, and how do we illustrate based on that, rather than simply, having a text and then illustrating based off the text. So that was a challenge, and I think that's not something that is in my skill set, and FLuX did a very good job of doing that. And I really appreciated like the story of this, that scene of me feeling defeat, and I'm like floating back home. Obviously, I did not float through home, but in the sky. But so. And that's what I appreciate about the graphic novel medium, is that it allows you to you can write about that in text, that you're floating home, but like having that fusion between text and imagery, I think allows you to really dig deeper into how this scene makes you feel emotionally. So I think it's a nice blend. Of course, you don't want an entire graphic novel of all of these sort of metaphors and whatnot, but I think FLuX did a great job of maintaining that balance between imagery based on fact and text and based on emotions.
So that also leads me into the next part of the question for FLuX. I don't know, I keep on hearing FLuX in my mind. FLuX, my apologies, John.
I've heard worse, trust me. So.
So you use silence and open space in a real emotional way. As I was reading, I was thinking, like, how do you know when to let certain images speak for themselves?
It's a good question. I think, for Yarma's story, it was pretty much what I wanted to do. I did a little of it with David's story, but I felt like with hers, on one hand, it was actually kind of an easy out because I don't know the Yanomami language. But on the other hand, it was really, I just wanted people to feel, kind of get her experience, right? Without telling them verbatim, like everything that's going on, just kind of live it. And to your point, like I'm influenced by a lot, probably more so from film than I am from comics. So like that to me was like how I saw it. I saw it playing out like that. Just, you're kind of seeing her point of view, her perspective, highlights of what that's like living there and just taking it all in. As opposed to, someone just saying like, she did this, she did this, she did this kind of thing. So I think that's where, and I think that silence also lets the reader just sort of kind of come up with their own, interpretations of things. I think what you said about, the mirrors and that sort of thing, none of the stuff was intentional. So I think there's probably stuff that people look at when they're looking at these things happening. Like, that quiet is, it lets me kind of come up with my own thing, or maybe they can infer stuff that we didn't do. Like the David flying, I just thought about it. This wasn't intended, but he was supposed to be a superhero, and this is the kind of superhero he wound up as a teenager, just sort of like, like sadly floating. So, and that was not intended, but that's the thing. I feel like with these quiet scenes, you can kind of like come up with whatever. So yeah.
Wow. Okay, so we are going to shift on over to our final part of this interview. And so we're going to talk about the risk and the response and what's happening in the future with the both of you. So again, in any particular order, was there a moment where you were nervous to share publicly? And if so, how did the reader's response affect you?
David, are you still with us? I think he may have cut out.
Let me see.
And I think this would probably be more for him, since this is, it's really his story. I do a little of it with mine. But it's not the same. It's online, so I haven't gotten a ton of like specific comments, and there's still more to come. So, but I do know that that's one thing I'm always curious about, what people are going to think, as I'm sure you understand, when you're putting your basically your heart and soul out there. Yeah. So sorry, I can't really answer for good, but
we're gonna let's see if we can pause for a little bit. Oh, I think he's okay. So David will be back in a few minutes.
Okay.
It looks like we're all catching this bug today of the technical difficulties. Is it because it's Thursday? Nothing really happens on Thursday. It's not Friday. Wednesday.
Let's blame it on Thursday for sure.
When you think about it, is Thursday the middle child of the week? If you think about it, because Wednesday's only 3 days in, but Thursday is closer to the weekend.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely between Wednesday and Thursday, I think.
This Thursday is Give a Middle Child for sure. Let me give David the link again and see if maybe we can get him back on. Hey, David's back. Yay.
Sorry about that.
It's all good, David. We missed you a little bit.
So what are we chatting about?
So as I asked previously, was there a moment where you were nervous to share publicly? And if so, how did the reader's response affect you?
Well, there were some really, very vulnerable moments of my life where I did share, in my memoir and also in Good. And so, the hard part is not. I don't mind sharing it. It's just having to kind of center yourself around the pain and emotions about reliving these memories. But I've been able to sort of rework them into teaching moments and to share those moments. So like moments where I was having these deep dark suicidal thoughts, especially in my adolescent years, and also moments of bouts of alcoholism, which I had used as a means of coping with my trauma. And so I know that I was putting myself out there, but I thought that really sharing the pain of losing my mom and then sort of the trauma that I dealt with growing up resonated with a lot of people. And I found that that what I liked about, taking that sort of not risk, but sort of chance, of doing that really makes you feel like you're not alone, because then other people are open about their stories. So what I do appreciate is that sharing this personal side of me is that a lot of people have shared their stories, and FLuX included has opened up a lot to me about his story, which really resonated with me, and then people of all walks of life. And I feel like that's sort of a really cool way of storytelling, whereas you're not just telling a story at someone, you're inviting them to share as well your story. And I feel like Good is an opportunity in a way to resonate with people all around the world and invite them to share their story as well.
Absolutely. I felt it all the way through. And I didn't think that I would, because I'm like FLuX. I'm not really a comic girly, but it's interesting how that transcended over whatever I expected from the book. So the last question. Well, actually, no. I have a question for FLuX before I move it to the final question. So you've done everything from packaging art to fine gallery work. How did this project fit into your larger body of work or challenge it?
I don't know. I just sort of I guess, since I was traditionally trained how to paint. But at the same time, I was also taught, I learned illustration in college. And I also got turned on to sort of alternative graphic novels at that time, like Alan Moore, and a bunch of other people. So, I don't know. I've never been like, this is my trajectory. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to be. I just go by I want to do this. So there's this graphic novel I'm working on now. And it was an idea based on an idea that just feverishly came to me. And I wrote it in a couple mornings on vacation. And now I'm collaborating with the executive producer and co-creator of Inside Amy Schumer, and he's done a bunch of other stuff. He's worked for Voltron Force and things. So he's helping me bring it to life as a script. And we're working together on the graphic novel to eventually try to make it into a movie. And that, in my mind, I always saw it as a movie. So actually, before it even became a graphic novel and I got connected with Dan, I actually connected with Netflix. I had meetings with Netflix, Sony Pictures, Illumination, a bunch of other studios. And everybody was like, we can't do it because it's not IP. They all loved it. They thought the idea was great. The art was great, but cinema is really sketchy. So at any rate, that's just one trajectory. But then I'm like, I also love to paint. So I just keep painting and painting. And I have work in galleries and I have work in museums too. But I've never like sought out a gallery per se, because I just see, peers and people that, and I totally respect their work, but like they just crank out a bunch of stuff and sell it for a couple $100. And I don't want to do that because I have other interests. I want to be able to work on a painting that's going to take like a year or two and maybe sell it for a lot of money. So I've sold work, just via email to collectors and things like that, as opposed to going that traditional route. So because I tried it, I was like, I'm going to try this because, why do we have to go through galleries all the time? So that's sort of my mindset all the time. It is probably a complete and utter chaotic mess in there, but that's what I'm usually thinking. I'm just like, okay, I go on my little, whatever's motivating me at the moment, and then go from there. So I don't really think of it all as a whole per se, but I do think as I've worked more and more over the years, things are sort of coming together. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Of course.
Okay.
It makes perfect sense. I totally get it. Sometimes you need to be able to draw inspiration from different areas.
Yes.
And as from one artist to another artist, it's important that you allow the story to kind of like unfold and tell itself. It's the best things come when it's not forced.
100%. Yeah.
Before I became an author, I was just writing. I would write any given day and time. I would write when I'm washing dishes. I would like start saying what I want to write out loud, and then I would sit down maybe for a couple of minutes, and it would come out, and I'm like, wow. So
Yeah.
nice to hear that people still appreciate the beauty of the long game when it comes to pushing out meaningful pieces of work. So thank you for that. And
Yeah.
the final question is for the both of you before we wrap up. What's something from the making of Good, a feeling, a scene, or a conversation that still lingers with you now?
You can start if you want.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I think when David was a child in the rainforest, honestly, that was one of the things that still stands out to me, not just from the comic, but where I got the inspiration from, which is he has photographs, and there are some out there on the web you can find when he would go to the rainforest and live there for a while. And he had these friends, and the look of joy on his face as a kid there is amazing. Like that, there's something about it. And I kind of, maybe I'm just, inferring this too, but like looking at pictures of you as a child in the United States, not always the same kind of joy. There's just this like abandon, right? Like this feeling that you got. And again, I could be just, projecting that. I don't know. But to me, that's what stays with me.
Yeah, well, Good for me is it's a story of growing up and finding identity. And so for me as an adult, looking at myself when I was in 4th and 5th grade, I have a daughter who's in 5th grade and I have a son who's starting 2nd grade. So realizing, that this is the story of it is in a way, not so unique because many people of all backgrounds, can relate to very similar ways. Although, it's unique in a way that, my mom is from one of the most remote indigenous populations in the world in the Amazon. But the part of, my, seeing my children grow up and what through them remembering that and hoping that through, the circle of life, that this story that has helped me heal and become stronger, I hope to be able to, transfer that to my kids. And Good for me is a living document that just kind of cycles through, by informing me and teaching me how to be, a good parent and for my kids.
Yeah, that is amazing how you just tied that together. And for me, to your point, the part of the scene where you come home and you walk up by young people and you find out that you have a brother, and just that scene for me, it was almost kind of like healing for me too, because I'm like, well, at that moment you finally saw your mother, and you saw the beauty in having that heritage as not much of a burden to who you were, but as an extension and important part of how you are going to move forward from there on. So thank you so much for closing with that. This was I had a great time.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
It was an amazing time, and I'm gonna miss doing this. But yeah, I look forward to checking out any future projects you guys have going on. If you want to share that with the audience now, you can, or we'll keep in touch. This doesn't have to stop, and I'm super excited for the next person that picks up Good. I picked up the digital version just because it's been taking a very long time trying to get my Amazon packages in. So to read, I just decided let me just download the ebook. But I like to have a physical copy always. Yeah, so thank you guys so much again. And I'm thinking if I should leave this live up. Usually, what I do is I end the live and I cut it up, but I think we might owe the audience members to actually rewatch it as though they were still here since I started late. My bad. But yeah, so we're gonna close out, and I'll leave this live up. Doesn't need to be perfect, and hopefully we can get more engagement from our.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Manji.
Anytime.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, man.
You too.